Dive right in. Okay, here are always a couple of quick notes I'd like to share before I start talking about the EA and the chief of staff role. Part of the reason we like to use the term force multiplier is because there are so many different titles for executive assistant and chief of staff. Sometimes there's overlap depending on the company or the executive that the individual is working for. Different organizations name these roles different things. And sometimes they're the same responsibilities, but just different titles. There's no real perfect standardization in these roles across companies, across industries. So that's part of the work that myself and others are doing, is how do we clarify these roles? How do we make sure that whatever role you're in, you have a clear definition of what clear definition in job description, you have a title that accurately describes what it is that you do. And then of course, for any founders or executives who might be on this call or entrepreneurs on this call, knowing who you may be looking for. The chief of staff might sound like this big title, and so you really want to have one on your team, but that actually might not be what you need or who you are looking for, and you may be missing out on amazing candidates because you're just using the wrong title. So no two EA roles are exactly the same, even within the same company. A lot of it does depend on who your executive is or who the principal is that you're supporting. Yes, there are similarities in terms of, the roles and responsibilities, but again, each EA might do slightly different, or each chief of staff might work on slightly different projects, or, in my role as a chief of staff, I am more heavily on, communication and communication strategy than I am on finance. Whereas an EA who works in a private equity might be more working more on finance, or in that sort of realm. So just those couple of quick notes. I'm not going to give you like the be all end all job description, because one just doesn't exist for these roles at this time. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that regardless of the role, the title, they're both force multiplier positions, which how we define that is that it's the right-hand partner to a leader that helps them build and run wildly successful businesses. So again, the title might be EA, might be chief of staff. Either way, they're force multipliers. But for when all things are considered, they are two distinct roles and they do serve two different purposes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Here's a very brief kind of explanation of the three that you may find in the executive office or the office of the CEO. You have the CEO and the founder. This is the person that is leading the organization both today and into the future. Then you have a chief of staff who tends to live more in the future. Their work is more driven by long-term strategy, planning, initiatives, covering gaps in the organization when there's no one else to fulfill those roles, because the company is experiencing large growth and they fill that need until time when the company can support that next hire. Versus an executive assistant who often lives more in the now. Their work is driven by the demands of the day, the week, the month. They're handling things in real time that come up, whether that's communication, whether that's meeting prep and follow-up, triaging communication and information, planning events and projects, yes, but then they're often the person who might be staffing those events and staffing those company-wide initiatives. So meaning like being on site and staffing an event. So they've got to be there in real time, handling a lot of those demands of the day, the unexpected things that are coming up. That again is it in a nutshell. I know a lot of times we talk about, a lot of people talk about the EA being tactical and the chief of staff being strategic. I don't really love that definition because I think it discounts all of the strategy that's involved in being an executive assistant. And it doesn't fully explain the chief of staff role because they often have to, roll up their sleeves and get very tactical depending on what project they're working on. So they're both strategic, they're both tactical in their roles. They're simply doing two different parts of the business. We often talk about the founder and their force multiplier really doing one large job. They're just doing two different parts of it. And that goes with this executive office trifecta. If you have all three positions in the company, then you're all really working on the exact same projects, on the exact same initiatives, and you have the same mission. You're just doing different parts of it based on your strengths and your skill set. Okay, so here's another way to look at the role and how it breaks down. So the executives, and this is from brand services. So an EA in their definition is somebody who makes the day-to-day effortless. And that's kind of what I was saying too. It's that they work on the demands of the day. They're handling things like calendar, travel, prioritizing projects and communication and people, and who needs to be communicating with the executive at what time, email management, project management. Their key focus is the efficiency for the principal and by extension, the executive team. A chief of staff is often working more on the organizational ecosystem or the organization as a whole while partnering directly with the principal. So they are doing things like tracking OKRs, working on some longer term goals or initiatives. They're working through communication strategies with the leadership team on behalf of the principal. They often will act as a strategic advisor, both for the leadership team and for the executive. They work on culture. They can help be change agents, and both positions, I think, are also time and energy managers as well, both for themselves and for their executives. Their key focus is progress towards organizational outcomes based off of the agenda and the goals of the principal for the year or the three years. I would agree that you often want to hire that not often, I would say you want to hire an EA first. They are going to make the largest and fastest impact on your day-to-day. If you are an executive or a founder, they're going to immediately alleviate that 80% of your workload that is taking time and energy and focus away from the leader doing their most important things that only they can do, which might be client meetings, investor meetings, hiring other leadership team members, again, working with banking, capital raises. So the 80% of the miscellaneous stuff goes to the EA, and that first hire, that first point of leverage can make a massive impact on the executive. And then as the company continues to grow, becomes more complex. If you're working for an individual founder and they all of a sudden are working on 7 different organizations, they all of a sudden have 7 different entities and they're trying to streamline and run each one, that may call for a chief of staff who's going to help them build out organizational structures and that organizational ecosystem, while that executive assistant is still force multiplying the efforts of the executive on a day-to-day basis. So again, ask questions if you have any. I'm going to keep going for now. Here's a little bit more of like a specific, and it just kind of tags on to this outline, a little bit more of an in-depth job description, if you will, of what the executive assistant works on. I want you to note here, and that you'll see in both the executive assistant and in the chief of staff role, that they're both highly visible strategic partners that support their founders or their principals. They do it in different ways. One does it more in the managing that day-to-day and managing the logistics and the operations of the office. And the chief of staff does it more in supporting the growth and the organizational structure of the office and of the principal, but they're both highly visible strategic partners. Now, that doesn't mean that they're highly visible externally outside of the organization. They're just highly visible, or they should be highly visible to the executive and to the leadership team, and quite honestly, to the internal team at large. While yes, force multipliers operate behind the scenes, in terms of from the public's perspective, they are definitely a visible role within the organization, or they should be, and should be positioned that way. So again, you can see kind of some of the day-to-day things that they may work on, again, depending on how their role is positioned within the company. Sometimes EAs also can overlap with a personal assistant, again, depending on the leader. If it's a startup founder, it may be a bit of an overlap between EA and PA responsibilities. But again, it's very much based in the organization, communication, and execution of making sure that that executive is working on their most important 20%, and the EA is handling the other 80% of the role. Again, so the chief of staff, as you can see, is also a highly visible strategic partner, and they help their leader with decision-making, project management, and execution of strategic initiatives across the organization, or in some cases across a portfolio of companies or a portfolio of projects, depending on the leader. I always like to kind of focus on these 3 things when we think about the chief of staff role. They organize, communicate, and they delegate. They're organizing ideas, projects, people, time, and resources to keep all of the various companies or all of the various projects and initiatives moving forward. They are communicating the vision, ideas, and projects often on behalf of their principal. They're also making sure that the process is communicated. This may include creating content, providing context when needed, helping connect the dots, identifying gaps, and helping figure out how you're going to close those gaps, again, across the company. They are also delegating, whether it's projects, tasks, to appropriate team members. And then the key part is they're supporting them and then holding them accountable. This is where KPIs and OKRs come into play, and making sure all of these initiatives are being organized and tracked, so that the executive, the principal that the chief of staff is working for, has all of the visibility that they need into what their team members are doing at a moment's notice, so that they can make the best decisions for the company. They often will also serve as a thought partner or a strategic advisor, sometimes as like an executive coach to the CEO or to the executive, to challenge their ideas, offer different perspectives, and to be giving them feedback from across the organization as well. So the next piece of this is, well, again, they don't always both exist in an organization. I don't often see, although, you know, I don't know every single company and every single company's structure, but I venture to assume that there's not always a chief of staff if there isn't already an executive assistant. Again, this isn't always the case, but like we talked about, an EA is, I think, really that first hire, and then a chief of staff may come along either closely behind or at some further point in the organization. So you have an EA, and then a chief of staff maybe comes into the organization, or an EA moves into a chief of staff role, and then they hire an EA to support them and the principal. Long story short, these two individuals actually need to work together, and they need to both be supporting their principal without stepping on each other's toes, without getting in each other's lanes, but still being highly collaborative. So this really helps you kind of figure out who does what when you're talking about these positions. So for example, a chief of staff might be determining who the executive should be meeting with, and they're often conducting a lot of pre-meeting work with that individual before they even get to the meeting with the principal. And an executive assistant is going to be scheduling those appropriate meetings with the right stakeholders, sometimes after the principal or after the chief of staff have determined that those people, yes, should in fact get onto the calendar. This isn't always the case. I mean, as an EA, I did some of that work too, and that can often happen in an EA role as well. Again, just remember, this is when the two roles exist in an organization. They're also going to be handling all of the logistics of the meeting, making sure that the correct Zoom links are set up and everybody has prior meeting notes. Any pre-work is handled, and anything that they might need to read is sent out ahead of time. So that's where the EA comes in. The chief of staff might create talking points or messaging and or handle communications or public relations. And an executive assistant, sorry, I'm just going to go through the chief of staff one. They pay attention to who's participating in meetings, who isn't participating, what issues need to be brought up and discussed. They really help facilitate often meetings when they're in them. They will handle 6 months. They might create a strategic 6-month travel plan for the executive so that they're maximizing their time, or they may realize that if they're, in Europe, they need to also make sure that they're handling some other meeting back in the States while they're traveling. So making sure that all of that is built out strategically, and the EA is going to then help them work backwards and handle all of the logistics, which, as you know, if you are an EA, are very extensive and time consuming, and they have to be really detail oriented to make sure that nothing is missed, things are rescheduled, canceled. I mean, putting together major itineraries and making sure bios are in place for every stakeholder that they're meeting with. So that's where an EA will come in. A chief of staff may lead a project or some sort of special assignment that just doesn't fall to any other division at that time. An EA may help support that with research, again, scheduling, any follow-up in conjunction with that chief of staff. A chief of staff may determine an agenda, a budget, a guest list for an event. And then the EA may actually plan the event and handle all of the logistics, and then staff the event with themselves or with the team. Okay, I see some questions coming in. We're going to get to those in just a second. So I really like to remind myself of this and others that an executive assistant and a chief of staff are both working on the same core mission, which is to ensure that their principal's vision and agenda is clarified, communicated, and executed throughout the entire organization. They are just accomplishing this mission by each using their unique skills and strengths. So I'll just use myself as an example. I was an executive assistant for 6 years or so, and I've now been a chief of staff for about 6 or 7 years. And I did a little bit of both at one point. So I had a little bit of a hybrid role. I don't necessarily recommend doing a hybrid role because, as I just explained, between the two different roles, if you are in a hybrid role, you're always going to end up defaulting to being to handling the executive assistant responsibilities, because those are happening in real time and they cannot be ignored. You can't, push off getting your executive important information that they're about to go into a meeting and make a really key decision because you're working on some future growth project and working on, mapping out the OKRs. It just doesn't work. So it's very difficult in a hybrid role. You always have to kind of end up saying no to the chief of staff responsibilities because the executive assistant ones are so important and need to be handled right away. So again, that's why I think having both team members is amazing, because they're both working in their strength zone. An EA has to be incredibly detail oriented. And while I am detail oriented, I don't necessarily like to be in the details. I like to discuss the details and make sure that they're getting handled, but I don't want to actually be the one handling them. That's actually not my skill set. And I'd rather have an amazing EA who loves handling that stuff so that I can go work on the things that I enjoy doing and are more in alignment with my skill set. So one role is not better than the other. They're both really important to the functions and success of an organization. Okay, yeah, start putting some questions in if you have any, well, in the last few minutes. So if I don't get to your question today, or if you just want to continue this conversation or really talk more about your specific situation, then come and join us on our community. We have founders on there, executives on there, as well as executive assistants, chiefs of staff, program managers, administrative business partners. Our community is, it's all online. You can network on there. We also have training, additional downloads and templates and resources, on-demand webinars, all that fun stuff. You can go to that at founderandforcemultiplier.com/community and go check it out.